So I haven't done anything yet with this particular protein. And what I first will do is change my view options. And as you can see, and this is my basic setting. I don't show any bonds, voids, clashes, or anything else. Just basically the backbone, and occasionally I will show the side chains. And normally I work with score only. So basically I do all my folding based on score and based on what color the protein looks like. And for this denovo, I will change to hydro and score, because this is going to tell me a few things about what matches up with what in this particular case. So what strikes me is this particular one starts with blue and then continues with orange.
Excuse me.
Yes.
BP, can you please put up your behavior box?
Yes.
So
there
we
you
can
go.
watch. Everyone is always really excited to find out what you're using with that. Thank you.
You're welcome. As a rule of thumb, I use clashing importance 1 unless I'm fairly desperate on getting things moving. And I leave the cut bands, whenever I use cuts, I use them sparingly. I will leave this enabled. So going back to this shape, I see this helix in the end. Small sheet, this particular one, the big helix in the middle, and then this particular shape. And what strikes me is that this starts with one blue and then continues with orange as well. So this will match up with this really nicely if this goes all the way over here. And that's possible if I make this into a helix, then move this all the way around and have this end start at this point. And this will match up with this eventually. So then here is another piece that looks quite plausible to be a sheet. And I'll turn that into a sheet right now. There we go. And because you asked me earlier, or we discussed earlier, that it might be interesting to use a cut point, I was originally planning to connect this with a band, and then do some wiggle, and then turn this into a helix, and pull the whole thing around with bands. Now I'm considering cutting it here, taking this and moving this all the way down there as a shortcut, so to speak. And I think that's what I'll try. And when moving things around, I very often freeze sections, and I'll do that in a minute. I'm using shift and then mouse forward to move this thing down. That lines up really nicely. I'll freeze that, freeze this, connect it with bands. And then I have this helix, which I can now turn into a helix. I'll freeze it over here so it doesn't move around too much. And I'll freeze the other sections of the sheets. Quite possibly this will eventually turn either into a small helix or could be part of this sheet. I'll leave it as it is right now. So I'll rebuild this. And I like it there, so I escape it. And I like it because somehow it seems okay. I can't really put my finger on it why it would seem okay, but we'll find out whether it really is. Then there is this one, which also has blue and brown, or orange. I would tend to band this to this section, but this might be too long. So either I would have to change this into a loop and then have enough space to maneuver this around, and maybe this will bend a little later on. Or I would have to settle for this not connecting to this. I'm tempted to try that. So I'm going to change this into a loop. It's a frozen loop. I'll do this over here, and just to stabilize this, I make small bands so that it stays in place where it is right now. And quite possibly this is going to move because of the interaction with the helix. I'll leave this as it is right now. I'm not turning it into a helix because it will most likely interfere with the other sections up here once it goes over there. And I realize that I'm moving my my pointer around quite a bit, and it was discussed earlier in Global that it was easier to see if you change the view in YouTube to full screen. So I'm going to give this a wiggle in a second. I'll freeze this and see what happens. Oh, that looks nice. There is the Z button who will undo this. And I'll freeze that as well. Interesting. Aha. I'll unlock that. That's more like it. I've run into this several times now, and I forgot about it altogether. When you have these cut points, and these cuts are very far apart, and you leave the enable cut bands on, this becomes like a pretty strong band, and it tries to pull these ends back together, and that will very often interfere with what you're trying to do, just as it did right now. And initially I didn't recognize what was happening, so that's why I now switched it off, and this sort of remains where it is. Now this has bent over. This is my blue section that I would love to align here. So I'm going to move it over here. There we go. And then a little more strength. Is this aligning properly? Probably not. If this were to turn around, it would align with this. That means it would have to sort of twist around its own axis. And I'm thinking out loud right now because I haven't looked at this section. I'm going to give it a try and see what happens. If it doesn't work out, I'll add another cut point here and then flip it around. I probably would want to make another cut point and then turn this and move it up a little, because there's still plenty of space to maneuver with this part. And I could unfreeze this section as well. This helix will eventually have to move over here, so I'll do that now. Unfreeze. And see what happens. Sort of. So at least the helix is now out of the way. And I forgot which color this one had. So let's take a look. I'm tending to think that if I start this one near this section, these will align with this one, and this may extend over here, because here is a blue part. On the other hand, I could try and align it over here, but then it would not match as well as it might on the end. I'll go for a downward loop. So I'll take this, move that over there, and wiggle. Freeze this and wiggle. So at least it's now pointing in the same direction. I'm going to just draw it closer and then see where exactly I would want it to be. You can imagine that I want this probably in that area. There we go. Just wanted to get rid of that one band over there. And now I notice that this is orange as well. So if I'm tempted to make this a sheet. So that will align there as well. So score-wise, I haven't checked the score, but it's still way negative because this hasn't been closed, and probably the some of these sections are in itself not scoring very well. I could have a view and see what. Oh, it's just a few parts, just these two. It's not too bad. There you go. So if I wanted to twist this one, checking again the color, I think I'll go for that. Although I could use Bletch's method of tweaking this just by one. Thank you, that worked. I don't use this tool very often because normally I try to do things by hand. But in this case it was very useful. So I'll band this up now. Freeze that again. And give it a wiggle. There we go. So here's the helix, the other one. This one was on this side. I'll turn this into a helix and then pull it over to this side. Seems stable to me. On the other hand, it's easier probably if I do this. Just move it to the other side already. Freeze it. Let's see, I freeze it here, and then turn it into a helix. Unfreeze. and pull it down. Pull this down. Is this frozen? Oh, like that. And then there was this little section which possibly will move over here if this sort of stays in that area. So I'll turn this into a small helix, a curl really, not a helix. And freeze. Move that up a little. And as you notice, I'm not really looking at any specific kind of side chains. Keeps it all nice and tidy. The only thing I was interested initially was the color. So now I need to connect the cut again. Should I? I'm checking the score now to determine how bad this has become. Okay, just wiggle this out a little. Just out of the way. I'm wiggling this one, and connecting. I will rebuild this section later on because the score probably is very negative at this point, and I'm no longer checking the hydro coloring. I'm now moving on to the score, which is very in the negative, and I'll do a shake. This will be the first shake that I've done. Wiggling. And I'm letting it wiggle because at some point I'm expecting these things to snap. At this point they don't. That's okay. I'll rebuild them. And I'll rebuild this little section here. I'm trying to keep the length of the loop as reasonable as possible. Reasonable means as short as possible, because I don't want a big loop to be swaying around. This doesn't look natural. That looks better. Doing a local wiggle, which had a pretty heavy effect on the score. And this is because I had this cut point. I find with cut points, and that's again these rebuild scripts, they take care of it because they score as low as it gets. So these will be targeted first. Let's see what else is going on here. This looks nice. Eventually this will have to come closer to the sheets in the background. It's really quiet from your end. Is this still interesting?
Yes, keep going.
Okay, thanks. Just did another rebuild, shaking, and the score will move up somewhat. There we are. Wiggling. And it doesn't seem to change. I'm going to freeze it, and wiggle it locally, see what happens. Oh, there we go. So this is a trick that might help if you have these, like say, unwilling sections. The way to get rid of some of those negative scores is to freeze one of the adjacent areas that are still in a good scoring mode, like this one was. So you freeze that one. Then you take all of the red stuff and do a local wiggle. Very often it will then resolve itself, either through moving around a little or bending the side chains or whatever, but it will fix this low score. So most of this is now in a reasonable scoring shape. There's a little funny wiggle here, and to me this doesn't seem natural. Like it goes to the left and then there is a bend to the right, and it seems that there is another bend to the right. It's like a funny wobble. Eventually this probably will turn into a zigzagging shape. I'll unfreeze whatever is frozen now. And you can see that the score is not too bad. And I think we're getting to the point where it would be called stabilizing. So this might be a point for Ondine to pick up again